My name is Dylan, and I have been telling street stories for over 15 years. I usually talk to the kids or young adults who are at risk of drug abuse and peer pressure. I start off with a series of fast-paced escapades, which lead some kids into changing their traditional playground of gangs into something positive. My stories follow their adventures from selling or using drugs and alcohol. This helped them to become entrepreneurs, choreographers, and songwriters. Also sports managers, and military special forces, even investigative detectives. Raw Productions, Reach Out and Witness Productions presents Hoodzville Rap. Written and produced by Larry W. Keys. This movie is about peer pressure and its consequences. Some people never have to go through it. But there are some who go through it and wish they didn't have to. It takes all types of people to become a role model, depending on the situation, time, and age. The setting, plot, and characters of this movie have been chosen by circumstances of living in a drug-infested city. I'm not here to glorify the situation but only to identify the situation. Because it's one thing to live it and another to survive it. Praise the Lord. You guys made it back, good for you. Now, don't forget that I'm only here to tell stories about the hood, because you may never know where a role model have been, until you ask them. I'm not here to glorify but only to identify those situations of peer pressure in the hood. You ready? Let's pick up where we left off at. The guy on the side with the door opened, stepped out. He was short and stocky, brown skin, smooth face, black cap on backwards. Green and black alpaca sweater, buttoned down with a gold chain around his neck, the front of it hung a white pearl. Also he wore a pair of black Lee jeans, with black and white Converse sneakers. Hector and Chink looked at Jim with wrinkles on their foreheads that read, "Are you ready for this?" Jim lifted his head up, then down. Hector and Chink sat back down as Jim took one step toward the car. The guy who got out the car sat down in Jim's place as Jim got into the back seat in his place. The door shut and the car spun away. Either they were showing off or they were in a hurry, Chink thought to himself. Hector said, "Who are you, man?" "My name is Blade." "What the hell they call you Blade for?" As he sat on the curb he reached in his sock and pulled out a blade. It was a switchblade. Chink said, "What's your beef, chief?" As he moved toward Hector for backup. "Y'all made my man happy, 'cause I wasn't there to take Silky out, stab him, with him. Y'all gave him an edge to get away." Hector said, "You mean the dude's dead?" "Nah. He got about 14 stitches in his gut." "Wow man, you dudes are bad." Just then the olds pulled up in front of them and Jim got out and Blade got in. He raised his right fist up and hit himself in the chest over his heart with the fist and said, "Thanks again shawty, from the heart." The car pulled off screeching wheels and burning rubber. Jim smiled and said, "We got our own Roscoe forever." He pulled up his sweatshirt and there was a .32 revolver, pearl handle nickel plated in his dip. They gave him a 5 slap, pat pat, then they walked up the street toward the crap games. They talked up a storm about the ride Jim had with Scar and the talk they had with Blade. 2 months later, in between the apartment's walkway you could hear an echo of bullets. Bang, bang. The sound of a .32 rang out loud. "Now do as I say, dude." John looked surprised, the dice he rolled stopped on lucky number 7. "But I win." Chink said, "Nah. I win, sucker." Slightly nodding, and waving the gun at John's body instead of his feet. "Now give me that leather coat." Jim picking up money off the ground, Hector taking watches and rings off of their hands and fingers. Jim looked up at Chink with his beady eyes as if to say, "Let it go man." But Chink was mad as hell because John thought he was joking about the stick-up. Robert and Copper just gave up their money and stuff with no problem. You see, they knew that Jim was a little crazy but they didn't pay Chink no attention. John shouted, "Man, my mother gave me this jacket last week for my birthday, and I'm not gonna give it to you. As he slowly took off his jacket reluctantly and handed it over, John hollered, "Man, I'm gonna tell my mother you got it too. I don't know why you doing this to me, man, give me my coat back, Chink." John had an expression of seriously being mad, and cold at the same time, since he had on no coat. Chink walked away smiling at Jim. Jim looked mad at Chink. Hector was satisfied as he admired each watch and ring. Jim said in a low voice, "Chink, I'm gonna mess you up when we get up to the rec center." As they were walking side by side, Chink went into his dip. Hector grabbed his hand as he was pulling the rod out. Jim snuck behind Chink, and had him in an L-lock before he knew it. "Hector," he said, "take my Roscoe and hurry up." As he began to tighten up on his L-lock, choke hold. Chink never let the leather coat go. Jim whispered in his ear as he tightens up even harder on Chink's throat. "Felt like God, huh, sucker." Chink begins to gag and blurted out, "Wait a minute, man." Chink blurted out again low in a half-squeaky voice, "He made me mad." Jim pushed him about 2 feet from him, then took his rod from Hector and said, "We not trying to kill nobody, shawty." Then he starts walking toward the rec center. In the locker room of the rec center was a serious crap game going on. It lasted until the rec closed. The money that they took earlier was not lost, in fact they had won quite a bit in that game. Their profit was growing as the night went by and their reputation grew along with it. You wouldn't usually see one without the other. Later that night after the crap game, there was the police with John and his mother on the corner. Hector spotted the guy's mother. "Oh man, we in trouble now." John and his mother was talking to the police. "Wow, Jack, he be snitching." Jim told Hector to check it out while he and Chink stood in the dark shadows of the night. Then they found some bushes beside a house and peeped over the hedges from across the street. They saw Hector coming back across the street looking like he had bad news. "Jack, you got to give up that coat or we all going to training school for about 6 months. Hector was in a half nod as he told them the results of his report. Chink looked at the coat and looked at Jim. They all shrugged their shoulders, and shook their heads no. Then they laughed as Chink slung the coat over the bushes into the street. Hector walked over to the crowd of people and said out loud, "Looks like somebody dropped a leather coat in the street over there." Someone walked across the street and picked up the coat. "Hey John," a voice shouted, "is this your leather coat?" John's mother said, "Go get that damn coat, boy." As they walked across the street she grabbed him by the arm and smacked him upside the head. He said, Mom, Mom." "Shut up, boy." Pow smack pow pop. Jim and Chink laughed and gave each other 5. Jim said, "We had this rod for about 2 months and this is the first time the police was on the scene. You should have shot his butt." So this time they would burglarize, whomever they wanted to because of their backup, the rod. They decided that daytime burglaries were best. They perfected most things they did to a T. They would call to see if a friend was home, leave the phone booth phone off the hook, and while inside of the house the phone would ring on the other side of the door. Then they knew no one was home as they knocked on the front door of the house. One time they were in a house eating food and drinking beer and the phone stopped ringing. Boy, oh boy, they scattered for cover like roaches in the dark when the light was cut on. Then they grabbed everything in sight, TV, toaster, typewriter, blender. They went on a panic tip for no reason other than the phone stopped ringing. Someone must have put it back on the hook when they walked by the phone booth. One day a funny thing happened, while Jim and Chink were coming back from the store. The word was out that G-Man was looking for them, Jim, Chink, and Hector. As Jim and Chink strolled around, slyly lurking, for a house to break into, they couldn't figure out why Hector has been ducking them the last couple of weeks. Then they got word from Junior that someone saw them climbing out of G-Man's mother house window. "Aw man, Chink, y'all in big trouble." "What you talkin' about, shawty? G-Man messed Hector up earlier today. Haven't you heard?" "Man, come straight with the word sucker. As Jim tried to grab him, he moved to the side with his guards up. Okay, okay, Hector said that y'all was with him when he did it. Did what? Chink said. Broke in G-Man's mother house. Nah, man, not us. When we see G-Man we'll explain that to him. Y'all better see Hector first and straighten that stuff out. Junior said with a smile. Now, when they were not with Hector he had started snorting dope, heroin, in fact he was hanging with Vernon who was shooting dope. These thoughts ran across their minds as they walked toward Hector's house. The closer they got to Hector's house, the more they worried about G-Man. The boy could fight his ass off and was a member of the apartment boys, and the G stood for gangster. The boy ain't to be messed with. Jim said. Maybe Junior did the stuff to keep us from going too strong. Then Jim said, let's get the rod, it's stashed in the woods by my house. So, they made a detour, and wouldn't you know it? The woods were 1 block away, and here comes G-Man running down the street with Rocky and a few others. Mickey was locked up, so there was no calling for help. They had on blue sweatshirts, Lee jeans, big horseshoe belt buckles, Converse sneakers, and their black caps on backwards. It must have been a hell of a life for them to be rolling down on Jim and Chink like that. Rocky's smile was a kick-ass smile, that he do before he gonna mess somebody up. He was looking at Jim, Jim clenching his fist tight. G-Man walking up on Chink with one hand pointing at his face. Jim said, hit him, Chink. Don't let him walk up in your face, man. Rocky said, shut up, don't move, sucker. Talking to Jim as Jim looked him up and down. Jim and Chink shouted, we ain't breakin' nobody's house, G-Man. Rocky said, we got word, chump. Jim said, you don't know nothing. So don't start nothing, sucker. As they stared each other down. Meanwhile G-Man getting closer and closer to Chink, Rocky up on Jim saying, and you bet not jump in it, sucker. Jim said, man, you know Mickey wouldn't go for this stuff, and you know that we didn't do that to your main man mother's house. G-Man stepped up and Chink backed up, then something went, pow, smack, on the side of Chink's head. His hat fell off as he backed up down the street with his guards up. Man, I told you I didn't, bam. In the chest, plus you said something in the crap game I didn't like yesterday. Pop, bam, then Chink swung back, swoosh, right past G-Man's head. A swing and a miss, then Chink swung again and G-Man blocked it with his left forearm and swung his right hand straight at Chink's face. Bam, right in his face. Rocky said, let's go, G-Man, the crowd is getting too big, we can't afford to get locked up over these little punks. Then Rocky hit Jim right in the middle of his stomach. Jim felt himself bending over before he could raise his fist. Rocky had knocked the wind out of him just that fast. Those guys knew what to do when fighting dudes. Then G-Man shouted at Chink as he faked a swing at his head. Don't mess with my family, and you either, Jim, or I'll have your brother mess both of you up when he comes home. Got it? Suckers. Then they took off trotting down the street, giving each other a high five and laughing. Jim looked up at G-Man and blurted out, go to hell, and then Jim balled his fist up waving at them. Chink said, next time I'm gonna kick your ass, as he waved his fist back at them. Jim looked at Chink as they walked toward Chink's Kango hat and picked it up. He checked his Chuck Taylors for scuff marks, and then they smiled at each other and gave a high five. Then they laughed it off as they walked through the crowd while people gave them a high five for fighting back with his brother's crew. Mickey and the apartment boys, Jim said to Chink, that wasn't so bad. Chink said, I should break in his mother's house for real, for that punch in my face. They laughed it off and walked toward Hector's house, each planning how to mess Hector up for that lie that he told on them. They strolled down the street practicing their punches by shadow boxing with the sunlight shining over their shoulders. They didn't catch up with Hector that day, but they continue trying to lay a trap for him. Waiting outside his house, waiting on the pathway to the store from his house. Jim said, The only time he must come out is when he needs to buy some dope, so, we need to set a different trap for him. Just then Mark walked by Jim and Chink sitting on the curb. Hey dudes, Hector's brother Ronnie just come home and he got some serious dope, man. Mark scratching his arms and nose, one after another, with a half smile on his face. Then Mark said, oh yeah, he's up on the wall with Ronnie, he be holding dope for him. Then Mark walked by Jim and Chink, then peeped over his shoulder and said, "'Cause you know I don't mess around." They both laughed and said, when he do start, he gonna be a bad dude. When they walked up to the wall they found out that Hector was holding the dope while Ronnie took in the money. Jim and Chink smiled when they finally saw Hector handing out dope to people. Fear was in Hector's eyes. As they approached the wall, he backed up as Chink came up to him. He had one hand open and the other hand clenched into a fist, just in case. Hector immediately reached out and slapped Chink's hand. When Hector let go there were 4 $3 bags of heroin in Chink's hand. Hector hollered over to his brother Ronnie, "Hey Ronnie, I just gave Chink and Jim a tester, okay?" Ronnie winked one eye and motioned okay with his hand.
Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight. Lift up your head, hold it up high, high. We need your love in order to survive. 'Cause on my block kids are selling dope, 11, 12, and 13. Some say that manhood will never be seen. Try to talk to them, you look like you're crazy. Some to get through to, and some are just lazy. They leave their young girlfriend for habits of babies. To be behind bars is just plain crazy. Doing drugs in the street and not enough to eat. They lie and steal, it's no big deal. Brothers and sisters, remember the old man Blisters. He worked hard all day, he worked hard all night. Don't let the drug gang take you in tight.